People in that crowded club thought they were just watching a messy breakup. None of them knew that the quiet man in the shadowed corner, the one everyone avoided without knowing why, was older than their entire city and more tired than any of their broken hearts. The music pounded like a second heartbeat under her ribs as Lina pushed through the bodies on the dance floor, her phone buzzing with yet another message from her ex. The air smelled of sweat, cheap perfume, and spilled alcohol, but beneath it she sensed something colder, like stone after rain, like the air in an empty church at midnight. She didn't want to go to him. She had only meant to hide. But everywhere she turned, there he was again. Her ex, Diego, eyes glazed with anger, mouth already forming the same old accusations that always found a way under her skin. "Lina, stop running from me," he shouted over the music, his hand cutting through the air, searching for her wrist like it belonged to him. Her chest tightened, the same hollow fear, the same arguments, the same cycle. She felt small again, like every decision she had made in the last 2 years had led back to this moment, to his hands, his blame, his apologies that came too late. People looked, then quickly looked away. No one wanted to step in. No one wanted to be the hero. Except her eyes suddenly locked on the far corner of the VIP lounge, where the shadows pooled darker than they should have. There, in a black armchair that looked more like a throne than furniture, sat a man who did not seem to belong to this loud, careless place. He wasn't scrolling his phone. He wasn't drinking. He was just watching. His suit was dark and perfectly cut, absorbing the club's neon lights instead of reflecting them. His skin, pale as if he had never stood in the sun. His hair was black, brushed back in an old-fashioned way that somehow felt deliberate instead of outdated. And his eyes, when they met hers for the first time, were a deep, steady crimson that did not glow, did not flare, just held, quietly, calmly, as if they had already seen the worst of her and were not afraid. Something in that gaze felt like a door opening. Diego's fingers brushed Lina's arm, and a jolt of old panic shot through her. The crowd swayed, giving Diego space, closing around her like a cage. Her breath came short and sharp. She knew how this night usually ended, with tears in the parking lot, with another "I'm sorry" that she would half believe, with another weight dropped on her shoulders to carry home. Not tonight. Without giving herself time to think, Lina broke away from Diego's reach and walked straight toward the man in the shadows. Every step felt like she was walking into a story she didn't understand, but she liked that more than walking back into the one she already knew by heart. As she came closer, the air around him changed. The noise of the club seemed to soften, the pounding bass turning into a distant echo. The lights flickered strangely, as if they were trying not to offend him. There were people in that VIP section, but no one dared sit close to him. Empty seats surrounded his chair like a respectful circle of distance. She didn't ask permission. She couldn't. Her heart was beating too fast. Her thoughts were tangled. All she knew was that Diego was behind her, his footsteps heavy and angry, and she needed a wall no human could break. So Lina did the unthinkable. She stepped between the velvet rope, crossed the invisible line of fear that kept everyone else away, and in one breathless motion, she sat down on his lap. His body was unnaturally still. Not tense, not startled the way most men would have been, just still like marble that had decided to be merciful and not turn to ice. Up this close, she could smell something faint and ancient on him, a trace of old books, cold stone, and a whisper of something metallic, like dried blood that hadn't seen daylight in centuries. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt strangely safe, like stepping into the quiet corner of a storm. She could feel the strength in him, not in a showy, flexed way, but in how effortlessly he supported her weight, as if she weighed less than memory. The fabric of his suit was cool against her legs, his chest unmoving against her back. For a terrifying heartbeat, she thought she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Then she heard Diego's voice, sharp and close. "Lina, what do you think you're doing?" Her throat closed, words tangled and died before reaching her tongue. She was shaking slightly, and she knew this strange man could feel it. Every instinct inside her screamed that she had just dragged an innocent stranger into her mess. Maybe he would shove her off. Maybe he would laugh and apologize to Diego. Maybe he would say she didn't belong here, that no one ever really stood between people like her and the ones who hurt them. Instead, the man beneath her finally moved, just enough to tilt his head, just enough for her to feel the faintest brush of breath near her ear. His voice, when it came, was low and soft, but it cut straight through the music, straight through the fear, as if it was meant only for her heart. "I see," he whispered in English touched by an old, forgotten accent. "You chose my lap instead of his hands. That is a very brave decision for someone who thinks she wants to live." Lina froze. His words were strange, almost teasing, but there was no cruelty in them. Underneath there was something else, curiosity perhaps, or the first flicker of concern from a creature who did not give it easily. She felt the lightest pressure of his arm settle around her waist. Not possessive, not demanding, just there, a line drawn in the dark. Diego stopped at the edge of the VIP area, eyes widening as he took in the sight. Lina, shaking but stubborn, sitting like a defiant queen on the lap of a man whose eyes now glowed a little redder in the dim light. The security guards glanced over, then looked away, as if some silent agreement had already been made. No one approached this man, not even them. "Get up," Diego snapped, his voice suddenly thinner, full of forced bravado. "Lina, this isn't funny. Who is this guy?" Lina opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She didn't know his name. She didn't know anything about him, except that his presence made the panic loosen its claws on her ribs. Her hands trembled on her thighs, and she hated that Diego could still see it. The man finally lifted his eyes fully to Diego, and for the first time, Lina saw what lay behind that calm crimson. An endless, patient loneliness, like he had watched the same human mistakes repeat themselves for centuries. When he spoke again, his voice was still gentle, but there was steel under the softness. "She is not an object for you to summon," he said, each word deliberate, his accent curling around the syllables like smoke. "And you have shouted enough for one night." Diego laughed, but it came out forced. "Who do you think you are, man? Her bodyguard." The man's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile, though it never reached his eyes. Lina felt his fingertips brush the side of her wrist, noticing the faint marks there from old arguments, old grips that had been too tight. His touch was carefully light, as if he was afraid of breaking something fragile. "No," he answered quietly. "I am the one she chose when she was afraid." Something in Lina stung at those words. Chose. As if he believed her choice meant something, even if it was made out of fear and desperation. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, not from Diego's anger this time, but from the shock of being defended so simply, so cleanly, by someone who didn't even know her name. Diego took a step closer, jaw clenched. "Lina, come here now." The music blurred around them, the lights smeared into streaks of color. Lina could feel everyone's eyes, the weight of their curiosity like a physical thing. This was the part where she usually broke, where the pressure and embarrassment and habit forced her to stand, to walk back, to apologize without knowing what she was apologizing for. Her muscles tensed, ready to give in. And then the Vampire King, though she did not yet know to call him that, leaned a fraction closer, his voice a ghost of sound against her ear, so quiet she almost thought she imagined it. "Tell me," he whispered, words like cool fingers against a fever, "if I stand between you and your past tonight, will you have the courage to face what you truly are?" The question sliced right through every excuse she had ever made for herself. What she truly was, a victim, a coward, or something else she had never dared to consider. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the music anymore. For the first time, Lina realized that this moment was bigger than a messy breakup. This wasn't just about Diego or a club or one bad night. This was a choice that might change everything. Who she was, who she allowed near her, and what kind of life she believed she deserved. Lina swallowed, mouth dry, her body still trembling on the lap of a man who felt more like a question than a person. Diego's hand hovered just inches away, waiting to reclaim her. The Vampire King's arm rested steady around her waist, waiting for her answer. Between the past that still called her name and the future that scared her, Lina slowly drew in a breath. And just as she parted her lips to speak, the lights of the club flickered once, twice, and went out completely, plunging everything into darkness as a single cold whisper brushed the back of her neck, too soft to tell if it came from him, or something even older. The darkness fell so suddenly that for a moment Lina thought her heart had stopped. The music cut out mid-beat, leaving a thick silence that pressed against her ears. People gasped, someone laughed nervously, glass shattered somewhere on the other side of the bar. Phones lit up like tiny, trembling stars in the black. But where she sat, nestled against the chest of the stranger in the shadows, it felt like the whole world had narrowed to two things: the sound of her own breathing and his impossible stillness. "Power outage, everybody stay calm," the DJ shouted, trying to joke, his voice cracking slightly around the edges. Lina's eyes strained against the dark, but it was useless. The club was a cave now, filled with shifting silhouettes and anxious whispers. She could hear Diego curse under his breath, close but not close enough to touch her. A flicker of panic rose in her throat. In the dark, he could reach her before anyone saw. Old memories flared, hallways, slammed doors, low, angry voices no one else heard. Her fingers dug into the sleeve of the man beneath her before she realized what she was doing. She expected him to flinch, to pull away. He did not move at all. "Easy," he murmured, so quietly she felt the sound more than heard it. "Darkness is only dangerous when you are certain you are alone." His voice had changed. It was softer now, the cold edge wrapped in something warmer, something almost protective. Her breathing eased just a little. Across from them, a few emergency lights on the ceiling flickered to life, weak and red, not enough to truly brighten anything, just enough to sharpen the shapes. In that dim glow, Lina could finally see his face clearly. He looked ancient but not old, ageless in a way that made her stomach twist with a fear that wasn't entirely unpleasant. There were faint lines near his eyes, not from laughter but from watching, from staying awake too long through too many seasons. Those eyes, crimson and steady, caught the faint light and held it, like twin embers refusing to die. Around them, most people started pulling out their phones, the harsh white-blue light cutting thin slices through the dark. But no one's light beam lingered long on her corner. Every time someone's gaze drifted their way, their expression tightened, and they looked away quickly, as if something deep inside warned them not to stare. Diego, though, refused to look away. "Lina," his voice came again through the half-dark, harsher now. "This is stupid. Come here, the lights will be back in a second." His silhouette was just a few feet away, his outline sharp against the glowing emergency signs by the exit. He looked smaller without the club lights and the loud music. Angrier, yes, but also more exposed, like all his power had always depended on who could see and who would look away. Lina swallowed. The man holding her didn't tighten his grip, didn't drag her closer, didn't hide her. He just gave her that same quiet presence, a wall behind her back that didn't demand a single thing. For the first time, she realized, he wasn't stopping her from leaving. He was just being there if she chose not to. Something loosened in her chest at that thought. "You were about to answer me," the man said softly, his lips close to her ear but his tone patient, unhurried. "Before the lights went out, that is rarely an accident." Lina hesitated. Her voice felt rusty, like it had forgotten how to belong to her. I don't even know what you meant," she whispered. "What I truly am, I'm nobody. I'm just someone who keeps making the same mistakes." She hated how small she sounded, how tired. In the dim red glow, his eyes watched her with an intensity that wasn't judgment, but something deeper, almost like recognition. "No," he said quietly, "you are someone who dared to sit on the lap of a monster in front of everyone just to escape a smaller one." A faint, sad smile touched his mouth. "That is not nobody. That is a soul who is more tired of fear than of death." His words settled around her like a cloak, a strange mix of comfort and warning. Diego snorted. "Monster, give me a break. You talk like some wannabe vampire. This is a club, not a movie, old man." "Old man." The words hung in the air, so absurd that Lina almost laughed. Old? This man felt older than every building on this street, older than the stained glass windows in the churches she had passed as a child, older than the fear inside her. But he only lifted his eyes to Diego again, the faint amusement in them now edged with something colder. "Tell me," he said, his voice still calm, but carrying a weight that made even the air feel heavier, "when you speak to her like that, do you hear yourself? Or have you become so used to your own echo that you mistake it for truth?" Diego bristled. You don't know anything about us." "On the contrary," the stranger replied, "I know too much about you. I have met you 1,000 times in 1,000 different names, shouting at too many different girls who thought they were unworthy of better." He tilted his head slightly. "Tell me, how many apologies have you given her that did not cost you anything?" Lina flinched. The question landed like a stone in the center of her chest. She could see the memories stack up, bouquets placed on her table after nights of shouting, text messages that started with "I was just stressed," voice messages that said, "You know I love you, right?" She had always accepted them, feeling guilty for making him mad, feeling responsible for his temper, for his hurt, for everything. Diego's jaw clenched. "This is between us," he said through his teeth. "Lina, are you really going to let some stranger humiliate me in public? Get up, we'll talk outside, like adults." Adults? Like adults always meant. Quietly out of sight, where his voice could drop low and dangerous, where she would end up apologizing for things she hadn't done. Her body reacted before her mind did. Her back pressed harder against the stranger's chest, as if trying to vanish into him. Shame burned her cheeks. She didn't want to show anyone how afraid she was. Not Diego, not this man, not the strangers around them pretending not to watch. He felt her movement. His hand rose fractionally, then stopped, hovering near her shoulder without quite touching, as if he understood she needed comfort but also needed to choose it. "You do not have to move," he said gently. For a second, Lina thought he was reading her mind. Then she realized, no, he was just paying attention to how she flinched when Diego spoke, to how her breath shortened, to how her fingers curled inward when she felt cornered. Someone was noticing in real time what she had trained herself to ignore. "You don't even know her," Diego bit out. "You've known her for what, 5 minutes? She's dramatic. She always twists things to make herself the victim. She loves an audience." There it was, the familiar script, the one that always made her doubt her own memory. Lina opened her mouth. "Diego, that's not..." The man beneath her spoke over her softly, not louder but firmer. "Silence." The word wasn't thrown like a command. It was placed carefully in the air like a protective barrier. Diego actually stopped mid-breath, shock flickering across his features. Even the whispers around them stilled for a moment, as though the entire room had leaned in. Then the man's voice softened again, this time directed to Lina alone. "Listen," he said. "Hear the words he reaches for when he feels exposed. They are not about you. They are shields he throws in every direction so he never has to look in a mirror." Lina's throat tightened. No one had ever broken it down like that, not her friends, not the articles she'd secretly read at 2 a.m., not the well-meaning advice from her cousin who said, "He's just insecure, be patient." Everyone had focused on what she should do differently. Be calmer, be nicer, be less emotional. No one had ever put the light on him. Diego's nostrils flared. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he snapped. "You think you're better than me, sitting there like some king." For an instant, something like amusement, real and deep, flashed in the stranger's eyes. "Better," he echoed softly. "No, not better, just older, old enough to have made your mistakes and buried them 100 times. Lina turned her head slightly, trying to see him better. "Who are you?" she whispered. He studied her with an intensity that made her pulse jump. The club's dim emergency light picked out a small silver ring on his right hand, carved with an unfamiliar crest. The air around him felt cooler than the rest of the room, like he carried winter inside him. "You would not believe me," he said gently. "And it is not important yet. What matters is this: you came to me because you were tired of being afraid. So I must ask you again, even in this darkness, do you truly wish to live differently after tonight? Or do you only wish for one dramatic scene to make going back feel more exciting?" The question hit her like cold water. Her mind scrambled for safe answers. Of course I want to live differently. Of course I'm done. Of course I'm stronger than this. But in the silence that followed, another truth surfaced, quiet and brutal. Part of her did know the comfort of the cycles. The tears, the make-up apologies, the brief sweetness afterward. Part of her was afraid of what life would look like without that familiar chaos. She felt seen in a way that was both terrifying and strangely relieving. She swallowed. I don't know how to live differently. I don't know what that looks like. There, the ugly, honest core. He did something then that she did not expect at all. His hand, which had been hovering near her shoulder, finally settled lightly there. Not heavy, not claiming, just present like a promise that he would not move if she didn't want him to. That, he murmured, is the first true thing you have said tonight, and it is enough. Diego stepped closer, anger slicing through his fear. Enough of this. Lights are out, people are freaked, and you're sitting on some creep's lap like a child. Get up, Lina, we're going home. The word home felt like a chain. The stranger's fingers on her shoulder flexed almost imperceptibly. His voice, when he spoke again, was no longer just gentle. It carried a quiet warning, a hint of something vast and dangerous held deliberately in check. She is already home, he said softly. For the first time in a very long while, because she has found a place where your voice does not define the walls. A cold shiver ran down Lina's spine. The way he said it, like he wasn't talking about his lap or the club, but about something much larger. About the space inside her where her own choices could finally be allowed to matter. Diego laughed, but it cracked. You're insane, both of you. His eyes locked on Lina. You think this guy cares about you? You think he's going to be there tomorrow? Newsflash, this is a performance for him. He just wants to look powerful. At least I. He stopped. Not because he ran out of words, but because, very slowly, the stranger let his gaze shift fully, completely, to meet Diego's. The air between them seemed to thicken. Even the distant chatter in the club hushed a notch, as if some instinct rippled through the crowd. In those crimson eyes, all the gentleness Lina had seen earlier receded like a tide, revealing something deeper beneath. An ocean of weariness, of loss, of restrained power that did not need to roar to prove itself. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but every syllable felt like it had weight. You mistake my kindness for performance, he said. You mistake my patience for weakness. This is not your fault. Humans so often confuse mercy with emptiness. Diego's lips parted. What are you? The man's gaze seemed to look straight through him, as if reading lines written on his soul. I have ripped men from the throats of the innocent for centuries, he continued quietly. I have watched as they called their cruelty protection, their control concern, their fear of being alone love. And I have watched the ones like her. He nodded slightly toward Lina, carry shame that did not belong to them long after the shouting stopped. Lina's breath hitched, shame that did not belong to them. Tonight, the man went on, even softer, I am trying something different. I am giving you an opportunity that very few receive from me. His eyes sharpened, and even in the faint light, Lina could see a subtle change, his pupils narrowing, the red deepening. Walk away, leave this place. Learn how to be gentle with your own wounds before you try to own someone else's. The silence after those words was absolute. Diego stared at him, anger and something like fear warring in his expression. For a second, Lina thought, hoped, that he might listen, that he might turn, push through the crowd, and disappear into the night for good. Then his face hardened. You don't get to tell me what to do with my girlfriend, he spat. She's coming with me, this isn't over. He took a final step, reaching out toward her arm. And in that exact instant, the emergency lights flickered again, sputtering as if the electricity itself was hesitating. Lina felt the man beneath her shift for the first time with purpose. His arm around her waist tightened, not painfully, but enough to ground her, to anchor her in place. His other hand lifted into the narrow space between them and Diego, palm open, fingers relaxed. He didn't touch Diego. He didn't need to. Careful, he said very softly, and this time there was no warmth in it at all. You are standing on the edge of something you do not understand. The air suddenly tasted metallic, cold, as if someone had opened a door to winter in the center of the club. Lina's skin prickled. Some primal instinct deep inside her screamed that the line between man and legend, between story and reality, was about to dissolve right in front of her. She realized with a clarity that stole her breath that whatever this man truly was, he had been holding back. Diego's hand hovered in the air, inches from hers. The stranger's crimson eyes narrowed, and in their depths she saw a flicker of something ancient and wounded, something that had seen too much cruelty to tolerate even one more careless act. "Last chance," he whispered, not only to Diego but to the night itself. Lina's heart hammered so loudly she could feel it in her fingertips. Her past reached for her with familiar hands. Her future waited, wrapped in terrifying uncertainty, in the arms of a creature whose humanity seemed both fragile and immense. Between them, suspended in the dim red light and the breathless silence of a crowded room, her next choice trembled, tiny, invisible, and powerful enough to alter the rest of her life. And just as Diego's fingers began to close, the stranger finally said his name. People always imagine that when a legend speaks its own name, the room should shake, the world should split. But when he finally said it, his voice was no louder than a confession in a church. "I am Kael," he murmured, "king of the 39th Night Court, last heir of the Obsidian Line, and I do not ask twice." The emergency light above them fizzed, humming like a trapped insect. The air around his outstretched hand grew colder, dense as if the oxygen itself had turned to glass. Lina felt the tiny hairs on her arms stand on end. The name meant nothing to her mind, but her body reacted as if some deep, buried instinct had just heard thunder. Diego laughed, but it was a thin, broken sound. "What, you think I'm supposed to be scared because you play pretend? Night Court, King, this is ridiculous." Kael's gaze did not waver. "Your fear is irrelevant," he replied evenly. "Her choice is not." His words slid into the silence like a blade. Lina's fingers clenched in the fabric of his sleeve. She could feel his strength now, coiled and waiting, a tide held behind a fragile dam of restraint. "Lina," Diego snapped, voice rising. "This is insane. You're embarrassing both of us. Get up, we're leaving, or—" "Or what?" Kael asked quietly. The question wasn't taunting. It was almost weary, like he had heard "or what" 1,000 times and knew how it always ended. Diego's hand finally closed the distance, his fingers about to clamp around Lina's wrist. And then they didn't. His arm stopped in midair as if he'd suddenly pushed into something thick and invisible. Muscles in his forearm tightened, his jaw clenched. He tried again, harder. Nothing. His fingers trembled, stuck in the space between reaching and taking. "What the—" he choked. Around them, a few people closest to the VIP section went very still, their phones half raised. No one saw a barrier, but every instinct told them not to come closer. Kael hadn't moved. His open hand hung in the air, palm facing Diego, fingers still relaxed. But his eyes now burned with a soft, unnerving glow, like coals stirred in a long-dead fire. "You are used to the world yielding to your touch," Kael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hands grabbing without permission, voices raised without consequence, but tonight the world is saying no." Lina swallowed hard. Her heart pounded so fiercely she could taste metal on her tongue. She had always dreamed of someone stepping in, saying enough. She had also been afraid of that dream because she thought it meant violence and shouting and chaos. But this was not chaos. This was power held deliberately still. Diego's eyes darted between them, panic seeping into the cracks of his anger. "You can't, you're not, this is just some trick." Kael's gaze flickered for the briefest moment to Lina's face. In that instant, the hardness in his eyes softened, and she saw something she had not expected at all: concern. Not just for her safety, but for the weight of this moment on her soul. "Tell him," Kael said gently, still watching her. "Not who I am, who you are, say it. Here in front of him, speak the truth you have been swallowing for years." Her mouth went dry. I can't." "You can." His fingers against her waist were steady, a quiet anchor. "You sat on the Vampire King's lap in front of everyone, little one. You can certainly say a sentence." The word slipped out of him so naturally, Vampire King, that Lina's blood ran cold. Part of her wanted to reject it. Vampires belonged in movies, in old books, in Halloween stories, not in crowded clubs with cheap neon lights and too loud bass. And yet here he was, cold and warm at the same time, too still, eyes too deep, strength too quiet. Her fear brushed against the edge of something bigger than itself, not a monster's hunger. A king's grief. Lina took a shaky breath. Her throat burned. She was so used to folding in on herself, to smoothing things over, to making herself small so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. Speaking now felt like trying to lift a car with bare hands. But Kael waited. The room waited. And for the first time, she let the silence belong to her. "I'm not going with you, Diego," she said, her voice barely a thread at first. Then stronger, "Not this time, not ever again." The words were so simple, so small, and yet they felt like ripping a door off its hinges. Diego's face twisted. "Lina, don't be dramatic. You don't mean that. You're just—" "I do mean it," she cut in, surprised by the steadiness in her tone. You hurt me, not with your fists, but with your words, with your moods, with the way everything was always my fault. I kept thinking if I just loved you better, you'd be kinder, but that's not how this works." Tears blurred her vision, but she did not look away. "I'm done trying to earn basic respect from someone who treats it like a reward." Her chest ached with every syllable, like she was coughing up years of swallowed pain. Her voice shook, but she did not take a single word back. Diego stared. For a heartbeat, his expression crumpled, hurt, confused. Then his pride slammed back into place. "Since when are you so perfect?" he sneered. "You think you're innocent, you're clingy, you're emotional, you overreact to everything. Who else is going to put up with that? Him?" He jerked his chin toward Kael. "You think a guy like that is going to stay once he sees how messed up you really are?" Lina flinched. The words sank like hooks, aiming for all the old wounds. For a moment she almost believed them again. Then Kael spoke, very softly, as if correcting a small, tragic misunderstanding. "She is not asking to be seen as perfect," he said. "She is asking to be seen as human. You do not have to put up with her. You have to decide to be kind to her, and to yourself." Diego scoffed. "You know what? Keep her. You two deserve each other." His face twisted with that bitter, familiar mix of rejection and self-pity. "But don't come crying back to me when he disappears. You always ruin everything good you get." He tried to take a step back, to pull his hand away from the invisible barrier, but for a brief, uncanny second he couldn't. His eyes widened. The air hummed, low and warning. Kael's gaze sharpened. "You will not curse her journey as you leave it," he said quietly. "Take your shame with you, do not leave it on her shoulders." Something released. Diego stumbled a step back, free. He glared at them both, then spun on his heel and pushed his way through the crowd. People parted quickly, as if a cold wind had blown through them. Lina watched his back disappear into the darkness, the ache in her chest mixing with an unexpected emotion. Relief. Deep, trembling relief. The club's sound system crackled. Lights flickered uncertainly overhead, then flared back to life in full, bathing everything in harsh neon. The music roared to life again, too loud as though nothing had happened at all. But everything had. Lina was still sitting on the lap of the Vampire King, her heart racing, her body buzzing with the aftershock of what she'd just done. Part of her expected Kael to shift, to stand, to pull away now that the scene was over. Maybe he would laugh. Maybe he would vanish. Maybe he would brush it all off as entertainment. He did none of those things. Instead, as the world snapped back into its bright, blaring reality, he looked at her with such quiet softness that her eyes stung. "You did well," he said. The simple praise nearly broke her. "I'm shaking," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I feel like I'm going to fall apart." "That," Kael replied gently, "is what courage feels like when it is new. It leaves the body trembling because it has lifted more than it knew it could carry." She let out a wet laugh that was almost a sob. "He's gone, really gone." "For tonight," Kael said. "Perhaps longer if you choose so. Humans rarely vanish cleanly from one another's lives. There will be messages, calls, old threads tugging at your heart. But a door has closed in you, Lina. That is the most important part." Hearing her name from his lips startled her. "How do you know?" "You whispered it," he said. "When you thought you might be in danger. People always call themselves by their truest name when they are afraid." She hadn't even realized. A strange silence settled between them. The club roared around them, but it felt far away. Up close, she could hear something else, the faintest hint of a heartbeat, slow, too slow, like his chest only remembered to rise and fall when he chose it. Are you, she hesitated, then forced the word out, really a vampire? Kael studied her face as if deciding how much truth she could bear in one night. Then he gave a small nod. Yes, he said, in the way your stories mean it and in the ways they have forgotten. Her instinctive fear flared. He felt it. She could tell. His fingers on her waist loosened as if he was ready to let her bolt. I will not hurt you, he said quickly, and for the first time there was something almost vulnerable in his tone. I have never harmed an unwilling soul, not in, he trailed off, eyes dropping. Not in a very long time. How long is a very long time? She asked softly. He smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Long enough to have watched languages be born and die, he murmured. Long enough to have built a kingdom on blood, and then abandoned it when I understood what a hollow throne it was. Something in his words tugged at her curiosity, even stronger than her fear. Why were you here, in a place like this? He exhaled, the sound barely there. Because there is an agreement, he said. Between my courts and your world, we stay in the shadows, we feed without terror, we let your kind tell their stories and believe they are only stories, and in return we remain alone. His gaze drifted over the dance floor, the laughing faces, the shallow glances. Once a month I come to a place like this, not to hunt, to remember, to watch you burn so brightly for such a brief, painful time. It hurts. And yet I cannot seem to stop. Lina studied him. For the first time she noticed it, the loneliness etched into the corners of his mouth. The way his eyes lingered on groups of friends, on lovers taking selfies, with something that looked exactly like longing. You're lonely, she said quietly. Kael's mouth twitched. Everyone is lonely in their own way, he replied. But yes, it is loud when you have centuries for it to echo in. No one had taught her how to comfort immortal beings, so she did the only thing that felt right. She shifted slightly on his lap, turning enough to face him more fully, even if it made her blush. Her hand hovered, then settled gently over the back of his cold one resting on her leg. He startled just a little at the touch, as if he hadn't expected her to reach for him. You helped me, she said. Not just with Diego, you said things no one else ever said to me before. You saw things I didn't even have words for. It matters that you were here tonight. His eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat, she saw something deep and aching open there. Gratitude, and something like wonder. Most humans, he said slowly, would be running from me by now. I'm still deciding, she admitted, a trembling smile on her lips. But right now, I mostly see someone who did the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me, and I want to at least say thank you before I freak out properly. A low, surprised laugh slipped from him. It was soft but real. You are remarkable, Kael murmured. Even your fear has courage woven into it. They sat like that for a few breaths that felt longer than they were. Then Lina's practical mind nudged through the haze. What happens now? She asked. Do you just vanish, go back to your court, pretend this never happened? His jaw tightened, a shadow passing through his gaze. That would be the safest choice. For you. My world is not a gentle one. It is carved from old bargains and older scars. Humans who wander too deep into it rarely come back unchanged. She thought of the cold in his voice when he spoke of ripping men from throats, of centuries of violence, of loneliness, of feeding in the shadows. Do you still drink blood? She asked carefully. Yes, no hesitation, no apology, but not from those who do not offer it, not anymore. His eyes met hers steadily. I will not ask that of you, ever. Your debt to me is paid in full with the courage you showed tonight. You owe me nothing. The firmness in his tone struck her. So many people in her life had done her small favors and then acted like she was indebted forever. To hear someone, especially someone like him, say she didn't owe him, unlocked something in her chest. What if I want to owe you something? She said quietly. Not like that, but you asked me if I want to live differently. I don't know how, but maybe you do. You've had, what, centuries to practice not being who you used to be. His expression stilled. Hope, sharp and dangerous, flickered in his eyes. You wish guidance, he said slowly. I wish, she searched for the right words. I wish not to go back to who I was this morning, and I don't trust myself yet to do that alone. He looked at her as if she had just offered him the one thing he never allowed himself to want. "Lina," he said softly, and her name in his mouth sounded almost reverent. "I am a poor teacher. I have failed at being good more times than I can count." "But you keep trying," she answered. "Don't you? You're here instead of wherever you hunted before. You built a court, then walked away when you saw it was hurting people. That sounds like someone who's learning. Slowly maybe, but still." The corners of his eyes tightened. For the first time, she saw raw emotion crack through his composed mask, a mix of pain, regret, and an almost painful tenderness. "You give me too much credit," he whispered. "And I gave Diego too much for too long," she replied. "Maybe it's time I learned to give to people who at least try not to break what's given to them." He stared at her, the weight of her words pressing into places in him that had been locked for centuries. Slowly, very slowly, his hand turned under hers, his cold fingers curling around her much warmer ones. It felt like a pact. "Very well," he said. "If you truly wish it, I will show you some of what I have learned. How to build boundaries that do not have to be enforced by invisible walls. How to speak your own name without apology. How not to mistake suffering for love." Her throat tightened. "And what do you get," she asked, "from helping me?" He hesitated, as if the truth might cost him something. "A reminder," he said at last, "that even after all this time, I am still capable of choosing mercy over hunger. That there is still a place for me in a world that has every right to hate what I am." In that moment, Lina understood something she hadn't seen before. Helping her had not just been about her. It had been a test for him, a quiet act of redemption. "Then maybe," she said softly, "we can help each other not go back to who we were." His eyes closed briefly, as if steadying himself against the rush of feeling those words brought. When he opened them again, there was a decision there. "Very well," Kael said, "but if we are to do this, we must do it properly." He shifted slightly, helping her slide off his lap with a care that made her cheeks flush. Standing before him now with her feet on the ground, she realized just how tall he was, how the shadows still clung to him, even in the bright club lights. He inclined his head like a man greeting another royal. "Lina Alvarez," he said, and she didn't remember telling him her last name, but somehow it didn't surprise her that he knew. "Will you allow the king of the night court to walk with you for a while, not as your savior, not as your owner, as your companion, until you find steady ground?" Her heart beat unevenly. Fear whispered of danger, but something deeper, something tired of being small, answered louder. "Yes," she said, "I'll allow that." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then let us leave this place. Mortal music is loud." She laughed, a real, bubbling sound that surprised her. Together, they stepped out of the VIP section. The crowd parted around them again without knowing why, sensing something in Kael that told them to keep their distance. Outside, the night air was cool and damp, smelling faintly of rain on asphalt. The city lights flickered in the puddles, and distant sirens wailed occasionally like lonely ghosts. For the first time in a long time, Lina inhaled without feeling like there was a fist around her ribs. She wrapped her arms around herself. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow ache in its place. "Tomorrow," Kael said quietly, coming to stand beside her instead of in front of her, "you will wake up and doubt yourself. You will replay every word. You will wonder if you were too harsh, too dramatic. You must understand, that is the voice he planted in you, not your own." "How do I tell the difference?" she asked. "You listen for what the voice wants," Kael answered. "If it wants you small, quiet, always apologizing, that is not you. Your true voice will not belittle you for choosing your own safety." Tears pricked her eyes again, but they were softer this time. Cleansing, not choking. "And you," she asked, "what happens to you after tonight?" Glanced up at the moon, half hidden by clouds. "I return to my court when dawn approaches," he said. "To the halls carved in stone beneath your city where the old ones sleep and the young ones pretend they are not lonely. I will sit on a throne that feels too large, and they will ask me to make decisions that feel too small. And I will remember," he looked back at her, something luminous in his gaze, "that on this night, for one frightened human girl, I used my power for something other than survival." Her chest tightened. "For kindness," she corrected softly. He seemed to taste the word as if it were unfamiliar. For kindness, he echoed. They stood together in the quiet for a while, the sounds of the club muffled behind the door. The city moved on, unaware that a vampire king and a woman with trembling hands had both chosen a different path in the same hour. "Will I see you again?" Lina asked. The old melancholy flickered in his eyes. "If you wish," he said. "Say my name in a place of shadow and I will hear it, but do not call me when you are lonely, only when you are ready to be honest, with yourself most of all." She nodded, absorbing that. "I think I've had enough of lying to myself," she whispered. He studied her one last time, then reached into the inner pocket of his coat. When his hand emerged, he held a small, dark ring, similar to his but simpler. A single, smooth band of black metal that seemed to drink in the light. "I cannot give you fangs or immortality," he said, a hint of wryness in his tone. "But I can give you a reminder." He took her hand, cold fingertips gentle against her warm skin, and slid the ring into her palm. "Wear it when you doubt your strength. Take it off when you do not. In time, I hope you will forget you ever needed it at all." She curled her fingers around the ring. It felt heavier than it looked, cool and steady. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me when I felt invisible." He inclined his head, a king saluting another sovereign. "Thank you," he replied, "for sitting on my lap as if I were still worthy of being a shield." There was so much more she wanted to ask. About his past, about his court, about how a monster could grow a conscience that tender and still exist in the dark, but she sensed that tonight had already asked enough of both of them. "Good night, Kael," she said. "Good night, Lina," his voice wrapped around her name like a blessing. "May your next choice be kinder to you than your last." She turned away first, not out of disrespect, but because she knew if she watched him vanish, it would make him feel less real. She walked down the street, each step feeling both frightening and strangely light. When she finally glanced back, he was gone. No burst of smoke, no dramatic swirl of cape, just absence, as if the shadows had closed back around a missing piece. Lina stood alone under the streetlight, the ring cooling in her hand, the night air brushing against her tear-damp cheeks. Somewhere deep inside, where fear had lived for years, a new feeling was settling in. Not certainty, not yet. But possibility. In the weeks that followed, Diego did text. He called. He sent long messages swinging between anger and sorrow. Each time, Lina's fingers hovered over the screen, the old reflex to soothe and explain twitching in her muscles. And each time she felt the ring around her finger, its quiet weight reminding her of a man who had seen her scared and had not called her weak. She started doing small, terrifying things, saying no to favors that drained her, standing up straighter when someone spoke over her, taking walks alone at night, not to meet danger, but to hear her own footsteps and remember that they belonged to her. Sometimes in the mirror, she would see a flicker of red in her own eyes, a trick of the light, probably. Sometimes in the corner of a room, the shadows would feel a little thicker, a little gentler, as if something old and watchful approved of the choice she'd made that day. And once, only once, on a night when the rain beat hard against her window and the loneliness roared louder than her courage, she stood in the dark of her small apartment and whispered his name. "Kael." Nothing dramatic happened, no lightning, no sudden cold. But the room seemed to exhale. She felt more than heard, a presence settle like a cloak across her shoulders. A quiet, wordless understanding. A reminder that somewhere under the city, in halls carved of stone and old regrets, a vampire king was also learning, slowly and painfully, how not to be ruled by the darkest parts of himself. Lina smiled through her tears. She was not his queen, not his possession, not a fragile thing he had to rescue over and over. She was simply a human who, one night in a crowded club, had made a different choice and found herself sitting on the lap of a monster who was trying very hard to be kind. That was enough. And as the rain fell and the city pulsed, and the shadows deepened around her in something that felt almost like a hug, Lina understood, finally, what had really changed everything that night. It was not the vampire's power. It was the softness in his whisper when he asked her who she truly wanted to be, and the wild, trembling courage it woke up inside her at last.